Dante is one of the greatest, but also one of the most intimidating characters you could possibly play as. And that's actually a good thing. If Nero's streamlined gameplay is the appetizer to Devil May Cry, then Dante is the main course. And Dante, especially in Devil May Cry 5, has one of the largest movesets out of any video game character ever created. Even when he crosses over into fighting games, this aspect of his character usually carries over to the degree that Dante in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has a monstrous moveset. And to break it down, in Devil May Cry 5, Dante has 4 different styles he can swap to mid-combat, 4 different melee weapons to choose from, and 4 different gun weapons to complement his moveset. He also has 2 different super forms, and he has like 4 different gauges on the screen that do multiple things. But with that being said, with the exception of the Royal Guard style, nothing a part of Dante's moveset is inherently more difficult than Nero. Every style and every weapon in Dante's arsenal can be isolated on their own and easily understood. I mean, every weapon in the game has a similar pause hit combo that usually activates once or twice after the player lands a strike. It's really asking the player to mix up all of these elements and switch between everything on the fly that makes his gameplay more complicated. You can do everything at once, and that's a lot to take in for new players here. But Dante can pretty much do everything you want him to. Living up to that potential and getting out of your comfort zone is the real challenge to using this character. And I'm going to review every single weapon and style that's a part of Dante's arsenal. But before I get into how or why, I gotta get the shameless self-promotion out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more this channel grows, the more time, effort, and dedication I can bring to delivering you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. And with that being said, let's get on with the show. I'm going to give you guys a brief little overview of the styles Dante can switch between. And in my opinion, styles is the most important aspect of Dante's character. Switching between a different style will radically change your approach to combat scenarios. And Dante has 4 different styles he could switch between in combat, and all of these styles are going to change the default action of your circle or your B button. Let's start with Swordmaster. Swordmaster is a bit more basic. It lets you use your melee weapon's second form, and for other action games, kind of think of it as giving the player a heavy attack. Gunslinger is kind of similar, but it will expand the moveset of all your firearms. Trickster is one of the most important styles in the game and is pretty recommended for new players, but basically it's going to expand your mobility options. That's going to give you an easier time avoiding attacks. And finally, Royal Guard gives the player a block button with a complicated counter mechanic. Switching between all these styles may seem overwhelming to a new player, but you don't have to master all of them at once. On your first playthrough, you should just focus on 2 of your favorite styles and switching between the 2. A classic style to switch between is Swordmaster and Trickster. Basically, you're going to get all the offense and the ability to get out of sticky situations. And that'll be more than enough on your first playthrough. It's on multiple playthroughs that you can kind of work in all the other styles and see what works best for you. Now let's get a more detailed breakdown of all of these styles. I'm going to cover Gunslinger and Swordmaster in the same segment because they kind of do the same thing in that they're just expanding the moveset of either your gun weapon or your sword weapons. But to break it down simply here, Swordmaster doesn't just expand the moveset of your melee weapons. Melee weapons in Devil May Cry are called Devil Arms, and typically they have 2 different forms. So think of them as a hunter's trick weapon, but on action game steroids. Like, they don't just make your weapons more powerful, they can often change the way your weapon operates. It'll change the range of your attacks and how they work in general. It adds a lot more depth to the gameplay. But Gunslinger is a lot more basic. It's just going to give you more attacks for your default gun weapons. Again, Guns don't really have second forms here, but you do get more stylish moves here. Again, it's all pretty self-explanatory here. And now for Trickster. Trickster is probably one of the most essential styles to Dante's gameplay. It greatly expands his mobility options to the degree that he even gets a teleport with this style. Again, Trickster gives Dante at the start of the game a powerful dodge move that can be used on the ground or in the air once you leveled it up a certain amount of times. This dodge move isn't just useful for evading attacks, but it also gives Dante more mobility options. Dante is the king of the sky in this game. No other character, not even debatably Virgil, can move like he does in the air. But Dante's most powerful move is his teleport. Air Trick allows Dante to teleport to enemies in the air, and Ground Trick allows him to teleport to enemies on the ground. While Air Trick is more versatile in that it can always be used, Ground Trick covers a lot more distance. This teleport amps up the speed of the game threefold this time around. And if you're locked onto an enemy, then with the tap of the button a certain amount of times, you'll be right in their face in seconds. And on a side note, I love that Dante can now finally teleport the same way Virgil does. Just using this ability in combat feels like an overpowered anime character, and I love every second of it. I just love that Devil May Cry allows you to teleport like a maniac. And now for Royal Guard. And Royal Guard is probably the hardest style to master in the game. It's a lot of high risk and high reward, and in order to use this ability effectively, you're going to have to already understand the timing of different enemies and bosses' moveset. It even comes with its own meter on the screen, which kind of clutters things a bit, to be honest here. But Royal Guard turns the style button into sort of a block and a parry button. But on the first playthrough of the game, when you're unfamiliar with the game's mechanics, I kind of recommend you just use the Royal Guard button as a block. That's not the point of the move, but it'll get you thinking properly how to use it as an ability. Using the Royal Guard as a block on its own will cost the player some Devil Trigger meter. Blocked attacks will over time fill up the Royal Guard meter. However, if the player perfectly guards an enemy's incoming strike right as they're connecting with your guard, they'll perform a Royal Block. A Royal Block is hard to perform as the player has to wait till the last possible second to block an incoming strike here. But the rewards are well worth it. If the player performs a Royal Block, they'll gain both Devil Trigger meter and style points, and they'll even fill up the Royal Guard gauge. As for the meter, the player can convert the meter from their Royal Guard gauge into an offensive attack. The final ability of the Royal Guard is the Royal Release. If the player perfectly times a Royal Release while they're performing a Royal Guard, they will spend all the energy from the Royal Guard gauge with interest. A Royal Release is one of the most powerful attacks in Devil May Cry 5, and it also comes paired with one of the most satisfying sound effects of all time. And finally, Dante has a safer method of expending energy from the Royal Guard meter. A Royal Revenge will put Dante into an animation where he will automatically counter an enemy's incoming attack. And while it doesn't do as much damage as timing Royal Release, it maybe does like an eighth as much, it's a lot safer, and it's definitely useful for when the player is getting ganked by multiple enemies. Alright, so we covered our styles now, but now it's time to talk about melee weapons, because in Devil May Cry, the bulk of the damage you're doing in this game is going to be with your melee attacks. And we're going to start with the Rebellion Sword and Sparda. You will alternate between the Rebellion and Sparda as you go through the story of Devil May Cry 5's campaign. And these weapons haven't really changed that much since Devil May Cry 4 and 3. And they've definitely been nerfed to make the next sword that's coming up in the list a lot more powerful in comparison. But Rebellion and Sparda, like all sword weapons in the game, are pretty versatile, but don't really exceed in any one aspect. They're well-rounded, and they'll give Dante plenty of options all the time. Round Trip and Stinger are definitely standout abilities. Stinger is Dante's trademark move, and Round Trip will stun enemies and give the player the opportunity to use slower but more powerful attacks from other Devil Arms. And finally, where the sword archetype gets really interesting is with the introduction of Devil Sword Dante. And Devil Sword Dante, from a lore standpoint, is actually pretty cool. Throughout the entire series, every time Dante slays a demon, said demon transforms into a weapon that he could use in combat. And that weapon has the demon's old name. It's a really cool take on the classic Mega Man formula, but the Dante sword is tied to Dante's spirit and carries both his name and his will. And unlike other Devil Arms, he can just manifest it out of thin air, since it's basically tied down to his spirit. And I love the idea that if you theoretically defeated Dante, this would be the sword you would end up getting. But aside from the lore implications, the Dante sword fixes some core mechanical problems that I've always kind of had with Rebellion and Sparda. I never liked how some core abilities like Aerial Rave were only accessible behind Swordmaster. It's not like a special move or anything, or a transformation, but a generic 4-hit combo that you could use in the air. And don't get me wrong, this type of thing made sense in Devil May Cry 3, where the style system was first implemented as a way to expand Dante's base moveset from Devil May Cry 1. But it always aged kind of poorly to me, especially compared to Nero, who has his entire sword moveset accessible to a single button. Devil Sword Dante, like Nero, has his entire old moveset with Swordmaster tied down to the default attack button. Other special moves from his old moveset are now tied down to a directional input or a pause combo. You might be thinking, well, what does Swordmaster do now? Swordmaster now gives Dante access to an even more stylish and powerful system. Dante's take on summoned swords. And I'm going to be real with you guys, I love Dante's take on summoned swords a lot more than even Virgil. Virgil mostly fires his summoned swords as a projectile sort of weapon with a few exceptions. Dante, on the other hand, uses his summoned swords to slash and do combos from a distance. It almost looks as though a ghost or a stand is using his weapons autonomously. His summoned swords will attack with a 4-hit combo, or do Dante's directional inputs like Stinger or his launcher. And this has a lot of implications. It implies that Dante can now launch enemies in the air repeatedly. It's also super stylish in that it basically gives the player an opportunity to both attack and taunt at the same time, something that definitely suits Dante's character. And Dante's new version of Round Trip with Summon Swords is even more overpowered in that it allows him to use his sword weapon at the same time without switching to other weapons. It will automatically home in other targets, and it will stay there. It's debatably more overpowered than Virgil's, especially when you consider the fact that this ability doesn't even take up any Devil Trigger meter. Devil Sword Dante also has a special ability called Swords Formation. At the cost of 2 bars from the Devil Trigger gauge, Dante's summoned swords will automatically augment whatever style he's using. If he's using Swordmaster, the summoned swords will follow up his strikes doing additional damage, or hold an enemy in place for you while you land a powerful attack. Gunslinger will have them fire autonomously, similar to Virgil's just basic gun attack. And Trickster will give Dante an additional dash to use both on the ground and in the air. The swords will also defend Dante while he does a Royal Guard, giving you a bit more leeway there. Using Devil Trigger will also give you all of these abilities. There is a massive amount of content added on to a single weapon, and once I unlocked it, I never looked back to Dante's previous weapons. Up next is Balrog, and I'm a little disappointed that Dante just starts Devil May Cry 5 with this Devil Arm. I would have liked to fight Balrog as a boss fight. Maybe they can add that in as DLC, but a man can only dream here. Balrog is Dante's hand-to-hand martial arts weapon in this game. It's an archetype that he's always had since the very first Devil May Cry. And Balrog probably has the largest moveset out of any weapon in the entire game. No, scratch that, the entire series as of this point. Like, if Balrog was a weapon used with an entirely new character, it would be fine. It would be a lot of content. But no, it's just a single weapon that Dante has access to. Balrog has two different modes to it, a boxing mode and a kicking mode. And I know what you're thinking here, but kicking mode is not a Swordmaster exclusive option. Both boxing mode and kicking mode are baked into Balrog's default moveset. If you want to switch between the two, you can easily do so whenever you want with a simple directional input. Swordmaster will add on even more additional moves to both modes in Balrog's already gigantic moveset. And I gotta say, both boxing and kicking mode have enough depth on their own to be weapons on their own right, but they both have their own strengths that they exceed in. Boxing mode does more damage and is recommended for one-on-one engagements, while kicking mode is a bit weaker and excels at crowd control in air-based combat. In other Devil May Cry games, martial arts hand-to-hand weapons like Beowulf are powerful at the cost of the player standing still to charge up their attack power. Balrog is a bit different. While its flames need to be charged up to unleash its powerful moves, it functions differently. You can charge up these flames in boxing mode by attacking. In other words, you keep the momentum of your combat going. While kicking mode, the player can simply hold down the attack button to charge up the flames, and Dante will do this duck and weave while he does it. And this is a good trade-off here. The player is put in a vulnerable position to charge up the flames, but once the weapon is fully charged, powerful moves can be used without slowing down the pace of the gameplay. The momentum of the combat is kept intact here. Alright, so Balrog's moveset is so gigantic that I'm just going to have to individually analyze both different modes he can switch between. I'm going to start with boxing mode, and boxing is a powerful stance, but it has its limitations. Its moveset, will be powerful, doesn't have a large hitbox. And like Little Mac from Smash Bros, while you can use it in the air, it's slow and sloppy. This is a mode that's meant to be used while Dante is grounded, and it's kind of geared towards one-on-one engagements. But it also gives Dante some of the most powerful moves in Devil May Cry 5. You have the ability to do a powerful Shoryuken uppercut. It's only accessible when you fully charged up your flames, but using this ability will melt enemies' health bars and give you some of the most satisfying impact frames in the game. Like, outside of Royal Guard, it's one of the most powerful attacks in the game. The only downside to using these Shoryuken uppercuts is that it's slow, it leaves Dante vulnerable, and it needs to be charged up. But Dante also has one of my favorite moves exclusive to boxing, and that's the welter move. Basically, Dante, while holding down the attack button, will enter a really cool boxing stance like Mike Tyson, where he can slip and dodge punches. It kind of functions like Nero's table hopper, but the timing is a bit more generous. You don't have to dodge at the absolute last second. And if the player attacks after performing a welter move, Dante will throw a devastating counter hook. The damage also increases if the player does this while slipping an enemy's incoming attack. Like, it's just awesome. Time slows down. You get these awesome impact frames. And overall, boxing mode excels at one-on-one grounded combat encounters and high precision burst damage. But overall, I think it is just insane that there is a counter mechanic baked into this one move in Dante's moveset. A character who is already chock full of counter mechanics. Like, just absolutely crazy to me. Like, this could have been a new character in its own right. And now for kicking mode. Balrog's kickboxing mode is all about crowd control and combo potential. The animations for this mode are based off of the Brazilian martial art capoeira. And capoeira combines dancing with kickboxing, and I'm not too sure about how viable capoeira is in real life, but for a video game, it's cinematic, and it's a fun style that suits Dante's character. Dante's Swordmaster moves literally have Dante windmilling on the ground like a Beyblade. Again, while this doesn't do the most damage in the world, it's great for dealing with hordes of lesser demons. On the ground, he has more longer attack chains and combos than he does in boxing mode. Kick mode also has a lot more versatile tools at his disposal. He has a good launcher that activates fast, and plenty of air combos to follow it up. I find that when you combine his dive kick with his firestorm kicks, it makes this mode a beast in the air. He also has a super combo while on the ground. It kind of resembles Ken's super move from Street Fighter, and it's probably a direct reference since Dante's English and mocap actor Ruben Langdon has voiced Ken in the past. Overall, a pretty cool and versatile mode for Dante's moveset. And now for one of my favorite and most crazy weapons in the entire series, Cavaliere. Cavaliere is a motorcycle that Dante just flat out uses as a devil arm. It's a weapon that has been hinted at since Devil May Cry 3, where Dante used Lady's motorcycle as a pair of nunchucks. And I just love that sentence without any context whatsoever. Like, it's pure video games, and it sums up Devil May Cry to a T. And man, does this weapon live up to the hype. It's a little overpowered during your first playthrough, but Cavaliere has two different modes. Its standard mode splits the motorcycle into two buzzsaws. Its Swordmaster mode lets you use the Cavaliere in its motorcycle form. Cavaliere's attack are slow, powerful, and they have a large hitbox. Dante also gets super armor while he's in this mode. Its only real downside is that it's slow and requires a lot of commitment. But striking while you're like this, it's kind of like using a chainsaw. Now, faster enemies and bosses are not the most ideal thing to be using, but you can still find an opening if you're careful enough. And like a chainsaw, every attack can be held in place to deal continuous damage. Now, depending on your timing, pressing the attack button will power up your next strike and your combo. It's kind of like a play on Nero's sword rev mechanic. You have to pay attention to your rhythm and your timing. Cavaliere also excels in the air. It is trivial to stay airborne for long periods of time while you have the Cavaliere equipped. This is one of the most stylish weapons in the game. There is nothing more satisfying than switching to Swordmaster and literally doing donuts on lesser demons. Air combos are also based off of that one cutscene from Devil May Cry 3, and it's a nice little touch. And finally, the last melee weapon in Dante's arsenal is King Cerberus. And King Cerberus is definitely the fan service weapon in the game. It's a callback to the OG Cerberus from Devil May Cry 3. And the OG Cerberus is one of my favorite weapons in the game. You know, Devil May Cry 3 was a difficult game, and it's one of the first weapons that Dante unlocks, and it's pretty good even into the late game. It comes in clutch against certain boss fights, and I'm pretty nostalgic for it. But King Cerberus has been buffed to the extreme from its Devil May Cry 3 counterpart. Now, King Cerberus has 3 different elements at its disposal. You have fire, ice, and if you charge it up, you can unleash powerful electricity moves. And all 3 of these elements are mixed into King Cerberus's movesets. And Cerberus's base combos, without using Swordmaster, are kind of just all right. They have a long attack change, but they don't have much range, and they don't do much damage, which is ironic since every other aspect of King Cerberus's moveset have fantastic range to them. If you charge up your attack, Cerberus will use Long Barrel. And Long Barrel is kind of like this long-ranged electrical whip or change. And it's kind of good for dealing with enemies at a distance, and it's also great for crowd control. His base directional inputs also give Dante plenty of range. Pressing forward with King Cerberus will give you Revolver. It's a 360-degree spinning attack that can be charged up with ice, followed by electricity. Revolver is a fantastic move. It's great for crowd control, and while it isn't too amazing in the air, it can be used as a good way to finish off an air combo. Pressing back will give you Ice Age, and it's a burst of ice that can freeze enemies in front of you and launch them into the air a bit. Charging up King Cerberus and then pressing back will give you Thunderclap, where Dante will launch 4 electrical orbs at different enemies. And this is kind of reminiscent of Nevon. I kind of feel like King Cerberus from Devil May Cry 5 is a mix of regular Cerberus from DMC3 and Nevon. That's kind of the vibe I get from this weapon here. Swordmaster radically improves Cerberus. It turns King Cerberus into a flaming bow staff. And overall, this is where I prefer to do the bulk of my combos. The bow staff has greater range and does more damage than Cerberus in its nunchaku move. You have a lot more combos to work with here. Although, be warned, bow staff mode isn't as good in the air. Cerberus kind of struggles in general in the air this time around. On the ground, King Cerberus in its staff mode can be charged up in various different ways with directional inputs. You could slam Cerberus into the ground and cause a huge lightning explosion to do area of effect damage, but you can also charge the weapon up and press forward, where Cerberus will perform this very long chain-like auto combo. And while it is long and it leaves Dante vulnerable, it's stylish as hell. I forgot to mention this, but Cerberus has one of the best defensive options in the game, and that's Ice Age. Ice Age gives Dante a defensive barrier that actually stays out for a pretty long time. It does have a little bit of a startup, but again, it's pretty easy to use, and there's no real downside to it. It's really good for dealing with annoying enemy types like the Fury, or when the player is getting ganked by multiple enemies at a time. Now, it is no replacement for Royal Guard. It doesn't deal that much damage, but it's still pretty good, and it's useful to new players in the game. And let's get back to it. And now for the guns, and we're going to start with the series' most classic weapons that have been in every Devil May Cry game ever created, and that's Ebony and Ivory. And Ebony and Ivory are the trademark guns. While they aren't the most powerful guns of the game, they're definitely the most versatile, and they have great combo potential. Again, for gun weapons, you're looking less at what they do for damage and more about the properties of their moves. And in my opinion, where Ebony and Ivory really shine is for keeping your style points on the rise and for comboing in the air. Rainstorm, for example, looks like something out of Equilibrium, and Ebony and Ivory can also be charged up for more damage, and a maxed out Gunslinger mode will allow the player a skill that will automatically charge these weapons at once. Ebony and Ivory can also be used to target 2 enemies at once. So my overall review for Ebony and Ivory, this is a style-based weapon. You're going to be using it for its properties. You're going to be using it for juggling enemies in the air, for pulling off tricks while you're in the air. Again, Rainstorm is definitely one of the coolest moves in this game. Twosome Time is also pretty cool. Like, it's a bit more difficult to use in Devil May Cry 5, where you have to kind of just rapidly tap the gun button and the style button at the same time. But otherwise, again, pretty good and stylish weapon. And now we have Cavaliere, and everybody loves a good video game shotgun. While this double-barreled shotgun isn't a super shotgun like from Dune, it's still pretty versatile and an asset in Dante's moveset. It's a fantastic get-off-me tool that's fast and easily accessible. It also has more stylish move this time around. Dante can fire and swing Coyote around like nunchucks to knock enemies back 360 degrees. And he also has his own version of Stinger that he uses while using the shotgun. It's a pretty amazing weapon here. And now for double Kalina Ann, dual wielding rocket launcher. Now that is pure Devil May Cry. Throughout the game, Dante can find Kalina Ann and use it solo. It's a fine weapon on its own, but I want to review this weapon in its completed form. Double Kalina Ann is a powerhouse in this game. It's one of the few long-range weapons in the game that does a lot of damage. The compromise for all that power is that it's really slow to use, and it often locks Dante in place in animations he can't quickly cancel out of. It requires a lot of timing, commitment, and setup to be used effectively. But this weapon really shines through in Gunslinger. Dante has various ways of firing an Etano circus worth of missile swarms at an enemy, and this is great at dealing with hordes of enemies in the air. You can also drop missiles on the ground, and it combos pretty good with Ebony and Ivory's Rainstorm, but by far, the best ability from Kalina Ann is Mega Cascade. Dante fires a giant Dragon Ball Z laser into the air, and it's slow, but it packs one of the biggest punches in the game. It's kind of like Nero's Stamen Ray, but you can do it for free whenever you want at the cost of being immobile for a brief period of time. He also has a quick version of this move where he just fires the laser for a second. It does a decent amount of damage, and it's a bit more useful in fast-paced situations, but whenever you could fire that laser in its entirety feels amazing. And finally, we have Faust, and I'm just going to be honest with you guys, I never really mastered this weapon, and I always feel dirty using it because of its main gimmick. It converts red orbs, this game's main currency, into damage. And technically, since you can buy red orbs with real world currency, it's debatably even pay to win. Now, it's never really an issue for me. You can get red orbs in gameplay and it is optional, but technically speaking, you could make that argument. On the plus side, this does keep red orbs more relevant even in the post game, because once you unlock everything in Devil May Cry, those red orbs kind of just do nothing and mean nothing. But with this weapon, now they always mean something since you can convert it into your ammo. And I like the concept of having a gambling-based weapon. By setting the Faust hat on enemies, this is a really cute mechanic, by the way. You could put a cowboy hat on every enemy and boss fight in the game. It's pretty funny here. Dante can get more orbs when he attacks a hatted enemy. Conversely, if you get hit by an enemy wearing a hat, you'll actually lose some orbs. You can also spend orbs to send out a mini Faust who will fire red orbs on behalf of you. You can also surround Dante with a force field of orbs that deal damage to enemies, or you could just pay money to nuke the area with a meteor. And again, pretty cool weapon. I never really use it. Again, I feel kind of filthy paying red orbs to just win. I kind of feel like the Faust hat is a win the game hat. Otherwise, that's all I have to say for the melee weapons and the gun weapons. Okay, so we covered all the melee and long-ranged weapons. So all we have left now is the Devil Triggers, and as if Dante didn't have enough going on in his moveset, he actually has two different transformations he can access in this game. His regular Devil Trigger you get at the start, and the Sin Devil Trigger. His first Devil Trigger is the same one he had in Devil May Cry 4, both in design-wise. It powers up your attacks, and will give Devil Sword Dante his powered-up form by default every time you transform. Like all Devil Triggers in this game, it will slowly regenerate your health. And that's important because on higher difficulty settings, you won't be able to find green orbs in the game. Dante's Devil Trigger form also slightly expands his moveset. Stinger now is more powerful and pierces enemies, and he can now glide in the air with Air Raid. Sin Devil Trigger is unique to Devil May Cry 5. It's a more completed concept to the Majin Devil Trigger from DMC2. It feels a lot more completed this time around. To fill up the Sin Devil Trigger meter, the player will have to transfer over his regular Devil Trigger meter to the new gauge. Dante's moveset in this form completely changes to super moves. His guns are now tiny meteors, his dodge by default is a teleport, and his wings aren't just for show now, he flies consistently in the air. In this form, Dante now has access to a series of super moves he can pull off with directional inputs. These moves are very overpowered. Dante in this form pretty much power scales to like a Dragon Ball Z character. That's not an over exaggeration here. A lot of his moves just flat out nuke everything on the screen. My favorite ability that Sin Devil Trigger gives Dante is Quadruple S. If the player has a triple S style rating while having a full Sin Devil Trigger gauge, then Dante can access Sin Devil Trigger for free for a few seconds here. And this is a big deal. You can briefly access Dante's strongest moves and you won't have to spend any Sin Devil Trigger. The trade-off is timing. Hold on to the form for too long and the transformation is real and you'll actually waste your meter. The ideal way to use Quadruple S is to briefly interrupt your combo with Sin Devil Trigger to get a few powerful hits in. You want to briefly transform as much as possible, and you'll end up spending more time in Sin Devil Trigger mode than if you popped it on your own. It's one of the most powerful abilities in the game, and it's definitely an asset on higher difficulty modes. Alright, we just covered a lot of material here. If you're new to Devil May Cry, you might be scared based off of the sheer quantity of moves this one character alone has. It's a lot to take in at a base level. I could see how that would scare some people off, but I would say that Dante is not as complicated. He's only as complicated as you make him out to be. And I would say the best way to learn how to play Dante is to take it in slowly and to choose what aspects of his moveset appeal to you. On my first playthrough, I mainly focused on only 2 guns while switching between all the weapons, but it doesn't have to be like that for everybody. If you want to just pick 2 guns and 2 swords and 2 styles, that's a perfectly valid way to play the game. After all, I fear the man who has practiced 1 kick 1,000 times than someone who knows 10,000 kicks, an old quote by Bruce Lee. And this is pretty important because Dante kind of makes Devil May Cry 5 infinitely replayable. If Nero is meant to ease a new player into Devil May Cry's core combat system, then Dante is meant to keep players coming back in the long term. Nero's gameplay will take the average player 1 or 2 playthroughs to fully master. Dante, on the other hand, could take several. His character is just content incarnate. Just learning every move from every weapon could take a long time in and of itself. And I would say that's where I'm at in terms of my skills level. I don't have any crazy combos or anything, but I know how to use all my weapons and I could switch to them when I want to. But learning how to switch between all of Dante's styles and weapons is an open-ended question. I find that whenever I spend a lot of time away from Devil May Cry, my skills with Nero generally stay the same, but my skills with Dante always require this warm-up period. And that's because the timing of how you switch between styles and weapons is such a new layer of difficulty. It's a new form of muscle memory that the player will have to figure out. And while I'm by no means a master of Devil May Cry 5, I kind of take this series at a leisurely pace, I appreciate that there's always something for me to go back and work on. And that to me is why Dante is one of the best characters in all of gaming.